Good afternoon, everybody. This is Mike Hattery from Everybody Hates Cleveland. Today I'm joined by Jeff Ellis, and we're going to kind of drop a little bit of a postseason podcast, but we're just going to talk about the Indians minor league system today, and I'm going to pick Jeff's brain on a couple of players like Naquin, Frazier, Zimmer, and a few other guys. And, I think one of the things we really want to talk about is the depth of the system. And so, I'm really happy to have Jeff on. We've potted in the past. He's very insightful. People need to check out his work on scout.com, especially his draft work, which is really outstanding. So we're gonna start it off here. And Jeff, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty well. It'd be nicer if we were still watching Indians baseball, but as we talk about the farm, it is something to be excited about. I think it's a fun and interesting crop down there.
Certainly. I think I recently was kind of sitting down, and I think there are a couple of tiers to the system that are important, but I think the top tier is one that's deeper than it's really been, in a while. I think we have 3 or 4 really impact guys at the top, and then the second tier is really well. What if you were going to rank this over the past couple of years in terms of the system's overall down and depth? Is this the best it's been in 3 or 4 years, 5 years?
I would say in the time I've been covering it, I think this is the deepest I've ever, in terms of impact talent and potential impact talent, it's the deepest I've seen. And that's even post CC and Laporta deals, or Laporta wasn't that deal, I'm sorry, CC and Lee deals, just because the drafting prior to those deals had been so ugly that there wasn't much internal, all the top prospects were trades. Now we're seeing, what happens when we put years of good drafts together. It's looking like they're going to have 4 straight years with first-round picks as starters. I know has not happened in maybe since the 80s.
Absolutely. So I think one of the really interesting things is, I think one of the things I want to talk about first is how do we carve out those tiers? So I think the first tier to me would be Zimmer, Frazier, Aiken. Is that an appropriate tiering?
I agree. Yeah, to me, it's a clear cutoff. I know some might have others. I think those are the 3 guys who all look like potential multi-time all-star potential in all 3.
And then I think in that second category we have, and this is, we don't need to run this down, but there's this second tier that has Justice Sheffield, who I am really high on, and I think what he's done so far is impressive. You have Kaminsky, you have Bobby Bradley, and a Yandy Diaz type, and that's a really solid, average to above average regular type, which and that seems like that list goes, maybe deeper than that, maybe 6 to 8 deep on a list of, above average regular ceiling.
Yeah, that's one. Yeah, for me, it's kind of, I think I have about 5 guys there, and then Clevenger is kind of my cuspy guy there. I believe, exact order kind of escapes me, but I think I had Kaminsky, Sheffield, and of course I'm blanking on someone, as I always do, but there was one more, and then I think I had Clevenger at 8, and then after that 9 and 10, I'd say like 9 through 12, maybe, or 13 would be the next tier, but it's at least 5, maybe 6, and depending on how much you like some other guys, like if you wanted to put Mija up there, I could understand the tools why you would put him in tier 2. If you wanted to put McKenzie and Hillman because of the youth and upside and what they showed in high school, I could totally understand that as well. I'm a little more conservative, so my 5 guys were typically a little bit more people I had seen produce at a high level.
Absolutely. I enjoy your conservatism. I think one of the really frustrating things that we do when we talk about prospects anymore is we become very obsessed with ceiling over production. And we also, we do a really bad job of, really analyzing outcomes through the levels. And obviously, minor league statistics are really flawed. And I'm not saying go look at RBIs and go look at homers and things like that, because there are a lot of different factors that we have to consider. We have to consider age at the level and so forth. But I think the Indian system is really nice in that this season it's provided a couple of case studies in guys that I think are really overvalued. And Jeff and I usually agree on these guys because we have similar outlooks in terms of kind of weighing production with the tools. One of those guys is Tyler Naquin, and I know that I've taken a decent amount of flack for being very down on him long term. And you are as well. You ranked him 15 in the system, which I think is very appropriate. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I defended that pick on draft day because it hasn't worked out. I'll say, if someone wants to call me on that, but on draft day, he was supposedly had the best hit tool of anyone in that. We haven't really seen that. Maybe it's an above average hit tool. It's like, I would say the best I would ever expect it to be is maybe a 55. It's not a plus tool. But while his eye at the plate has improved, it's still it's a sub average trade.
Can you hear me, Jeff?
Arm is a plus plus ever to look. I'm sorry, I might have lost you for half a second there, Mike.
Yeah, I think I lost you for a bit there, Jeff. Can you just run down Naquin a little bit, and I'll cut that out.
No, I was downside of country driving. I was just saying that not sure where it cut out, but the basic idea is he's a fourth outfielder. He's a valuable guy in that respect. Speed, defense, maybe a platoon bat, but he's a fourth outfielder. I don't see much more of a better outcome with his on base is never going to be great because of the eye is not, eye at the plate is not good. It's improved, his walk decay has improved, and then not much power, and then you add in the fact he just hasn't been able to stay healthy, and it's put him below developmentally. Like, he should have been in the majors this year, but it's back-to-back years where he's missed a lot of time with injury.
Yeah, I think one of the really interesting things to me is how high people still are on him, and I get that there's injury history here, but we're talking about a guy who will be playing his first games in the big leagues as a 25-year-old likely next season. We're talking about a guy who was drafted as a polished college bat, who was close to ready, and it's been 4 years here since he was drafted. So I think he's in an interesting situation. I think one of the really interesting things to me is that people really buy into him, but as a defense first player after we drafted him as a bat first player. And I guess I'm kind of curious as to whether we're just overvaluing his defense, which may be solid, and it may be even a little bit above average, but we're overvaluing it in order to be more optimistic about the return we got when we drafted him. Do you think that's fair, or do you think his defense is legit plus?
I think that's fair. I mean, you make a great point with it's going to take 4 years. It's long to develop as Francisco Lindor did, and this is a guy who was supposed to be a very polished, quick to the majors college bat, and I talked about the plate discipline issues really held him back, and then injuries, of course, have been a big issue. But I don't know if he's really a plus runner. I think he's more of a 55 runner. I mean, at times I've said plus, but then you kind of sit and you watch and you don't see that. In the corners, he's a plus defender. I think he's an average, maybe slightly above average defender in center. The only plus skill I will put on Tyler Naquin is his arm. That is a plus skill, but I don't think there's any other skill where you go, that's plus. And, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, you look, what they ran out this year with Almonte in center field. I mean, Naquin's profile is better than Almonte's, so maybe that works out. But the hype train, like MLB.com had him as the Indians' fifth-rated prospect. I know they haven't updated that prospect list recently, but I really respect Jim Callis, and Mayo does an okay job. But that was just like, it's mind-boggling. It's because he's the first, he's a first-rounder. It's the classic thing. If Naquin was a 10th rounder, he would not be on any top 10 lists right now.
Absolutely. I guess one other guy in the system that's kind of comparable, although he doesn't have the first round pick ascribed to him, is this middle infielder Eric Gonzalez. The Indians organization's been high on him for a while, and really, I think a lot of prospect writers have been. Big guy, can play short, very tall. I think the hope was we could tap into some power there. Hasn't come. And there's really no reason, I don't know. I think he's a back end of the 20 prospect. Do you think he's anything more than a maybe upside utility guy at this point?
I'll be the first to admit I bought in on him. I was wrong. I just saw the numbers at Double-A last year and the size and the defensive potential, and I got excited. But I'm just now I don't think he is. I think he's a utility guy. It's you kind of saw a little bit more this year. He got a little exposed in Triple-A. He, and I think he'll make the majors as a guy who can play multiple positions and play them well. But he kind of reminds me to a degree now, to pull a bit of a deep cut, but like a Juan Diaz, where, like a big middle infielder who was kind of toolsy, who people kept thinking, well, maybe he'll break out. And then, he just got some at-bats. I think he's better than a Diaz, but I had him, I think, around 16 or 17 after having him. At the end of last year, he was in my top 5, which, I think a lot of guys kind of emerged this year. But I think the fact that he was that low was also kind of a sign that when I sat there and I looked at the numbers, we saw a regression. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, now instead of being a growth year, which is what I was banking on, it was more of that was the peak year in terms of like statistics and such.
I want to go back to drafting because you're, absolutely probably you are certainly the most informed person who writes about the Indians on the MLB draft, which is a tremendous asset to us. And one of the things that's been really impressive to me, and some of it's draft, some of it's not, but this year the Indians have had Frazier, who's 20 or 21. They've had Sheffield, who's 19. They've had Bradley, who's 19. They've had Mejia, who is 18 and 19 this year. They've had a lot of players take a significant step forward in development as 18, 19, and 20-year-olds, which is something that we haven't really seen in the past. And do you think that's development? Do you think that it's drafting? Do you think it's a combination of the both? Or are we just really lucky this year?
I think it's a bit of both, because if you look at, for as much as we and I'm the first one who's gone out of my way to point out all the issues in the drafting department, they're equally as bad with Latin American talent. Before Danny Salazar, the first regular contributor they got or the last regular contributor they got out of Latin America was Rafi Lefty. So it was a good gap. So I think they're doing a better job with developing talent. They're also a lot smarter, I think, when it comes to the draft. They're not. You look at that 2012 draft in general. They saved that money on Naquin to go get a bunch of high upside guys and just bet on tools. And since then they've kind of figured a way to play it a little safer, but still get some upside. Figured out what is a good profile. There's certain things you can look for which give you a better chance at success, and I think they're smarter on draft day, and I think they're doing a better job of developing. So I think it's both, and it is exciting because we're not used to this much young talent.
Absolutely. I think when we talk, we can look at the system and say we have 2 of the top 25 prospects in baseball, both impact types in the outfield, You look at the arms that they're collecting, and a lot of really strong left-handed arms. You have Hillman on the lower end, Sheffield, who I think was absolutely incredible this year, and to me is in the top 4 or 5. Kaminsky, and then obviously Aiken's a wild card, and perhaps Kaminsky is too, with the injury concerns that have been voiced about him. But just the overall upside of talent the Indians have in their top 10 is really different than when the Indians' top 10 had guys like Wes Hodges and Bo Mills, and other kind of mediocre middle infield types, Ronnie Rodriguez types, or Jesus Aguilar types. I mean, those guys don't sniff this top 10. And that just speaks to the sort of, I think, impact talent and tool talent the Indians have really stocked up on.
Yeah, it's nice to see someone like a Bobby Bradley, who wasn't a first or second round pick, who's putting up the numbers he's. I mean, there's some concerns as well. I don't want, I get a little too many people thinking he's going to be the next home run champion, and it's like, well, he's an A, so let's wait a bit before we give him a 50 home run season. But they're finding guys like him who are talented, who you should be excited about. I just always want to temper expectations. But we didn't find those guys a few years ago. You look at their ability with Justice Sheffield. That's a really interesting pick to me, because he's a guy who I knew about him. He was on the radar all year, and yet his stock seemed to slide the whole process. And his brother is also is at Vanderbilt and has a chance to be a first rounder this year. But his brother's bigger, older brother, obviously. But why did Justice Sheffield last that long? He's 5'11". He's sub 6 feet. It's worse if you're a sub 6 foot right-hander, but the Indians have not been afraid of, Rob Kaminsky was someone, I put out my draft list from, that was 2012, I believe, was the Rob Kaminsky draft. Or no, he was 2013. He was the same year as Frazier. And, I had Kaminsky in my top 20, but no one else did. And why did he slide? He's another 6 foot, sub 6 foot lefty. So it's been interesting to see them look at guys with height concerns. This past year, they took quite a few guys with injury issues. I think that's one of the ways they found, is they're trying to basically, do what, you hear the term Moneyball, and everyone thinks on base percentage, which is just, if you had a surface level of reading the book, or you've heard others refer to it, Moneyball was about market inefficiencies, and the Indians seem to be finding them right now. I'm sure we'll talk about Yandy Diaz. Yeah, they got him, and that's probably somewhat luck, but it's also somewhat, he was an older Cuban guy who wasn't known, and anyone who's over 20 coming from Latin America is immediately discounted. So it's players like that. That's they're finding inefficiencies in the market, and I think that's what's leading to a lot of success. And finding, they're taking undersized arms. Juan Hillman isn't a big guy. Sheffield isn't. Kaminsky isn't. And Aiken was hurt. A healthy Aiken is a top 3 pick, no doubt.
So before we kind of divert, I want to talk to you about how we look at minor leaguers. And I think a lot of times I have frustration because things like this will happen. Toru Murata will go 15 and something with a mid-3s ERA, and people get really excited. Or they'll get really frustrated with a season from Francisco Mejia where he's 19 and his overall numbers, he doesn't have a great batting average. They're worried about the power. And so I think one of the things that you and I have talked about a lot in the past, but I always want to reiterate, is when you look at minor league guys, I think the first 3 things that are really important to look at, whether it's a pitcher or whether a hitter, is K rate, walk rate, and age for the level. And so, and then that allows us to say, holy crap, Bobby Bradley's having an awesome year, and he's young for the level, but also, holy crap, he's striking out over 30% of the time. So let's tap the brakes a little bit with Bobby Bradley. Which needs to be done. And I love Bobby Bradley. I love the idea of him, but
no, it's totally, and that's, we could almost call this the Jesus Aguilar corollary. You know, everyone got so excited for him in high A because he hit 20 home runs and had like 80 RBIs. And if you're getting excited about minor league RBIs, then you're just not understanding things.
Absolutely.
You know, like I said, it's good to see power. If I see, over 20 home runs, it makes me double take a guy and look at, other side power stats, see what's happening with him. But, it's, you have to look at very specific things because if a guy, you'll see a guy, Scott Morgan hit like 30 home runs in high A, I believe, and never made it to the majors. Put up numbers similar to a Bobby Bradley. Once again, a deep cut for longtime Indians fans, but eventually his lack of plate discipline and no eye at the plate meant that he couldn't progress to a certain point. I could bring up a Danny Peoples, keep digging into these big power guys the Indians had in the 90s who never made it to the majors, because it doesn't matter if you have 80 grade power. If you have a 20 eye at the plate, you're just going to get slaughtered.
I think Aguilar also teaches a really good lesson about I really don't care what he did in Columbus this year. He's about 25 years old, and it's a hitter-friendly park, so people need to stop caring about this. And especially with Columbus, I'm always worried. I think that people really have a skewed view, and Columbus is awful for Indians fans because it is one of the 5 most favorable parks in the entire country for power hitting. And it's something where it really deceives us. I honestly, I think if we have a conversation now, Aguilar is kind of carrying tool from the lower minors, and I know I'm getting distracted with Jesus Aguilar. It doesn't really matter, but his carrying tool from the lower minors was, whether he would have the power from the right side, and his production in AAA is something where we can say, wow, that's really average power. If maybe it's 50 power or something, but I mean, there's not much to get excited about there. But I'll move on. I got to stop beating up on Jesus Aguilar.
I mean, I would just say, it's look at Matt Laporta's AAA numbers versus what he did in his career. Matt Laporta is the classic example of why you don't need to get that excited about big numbers in AAA.
So next, and also Andy Marte's blow up season, also a blast in AAA. But Yandy Diaz. A couple of questions with him. I think if we're honest, and I really like Giovanni Urshela, but to me he's someone who has that above average glove, but the hit tool is so questionable to me that I think long term he's a platoon bat. Maybe he's a right-handed Jack Hanahan. And so when you're looking at the Indians, a team that's really right on the threshold, the obvious positions to address are third and center. Possibly right, but most likely third and center, and I think that brings us to Diaz here. What do we see in this guy, and how do we grade out his defense? I've heard really varying reports on his defense, so I keep asking people, is it above average? Is it average? What do we got here?
I saw him. I went to, when it's all said and done, maybe 10 or 12 AA games last year. So I got to see a good chunk of Yandy. And he was an interesting case because I really didn't know about him too much going in. But he was, the minute you show up, everyone's like, have you seen Yandy yet? Have you seen Yandy? Like, he was the talk. And then I got to see him, and he was the most impressive bat I saw in AA this year, much more so than Zimmer or Nelly Rodriguez or some of the other, kind of bigger names. The power, I mean, he was very much a slap hitter, but then we started to see more power, and he was one of those guys where he's built, you expect more power, and he's just got a swing that looks like it should generate power. It's a fluid swing. It's quick through the zone. I think, I'm not saying he's going to be a huge power guy, but I think he's got a chance to be a double-digit, a 10 to 15 home run guy. Defensively, I didn't see anything special. He looked like an average defender. I know he's big and the arm strong, so maybe there's a chance for plus. I mean, the big thing is the hit tool looked genuine plus to me. I thought that was a chance for a 60-grade hit tool, and his eye at the plate was, Carlos Santana level for, not quite. I mean, Santana's like a plus. Whoa. He never seemed to swing at a bad pitch. You're sitting there and you're like, if Yandy had it reached that point, though, I guess I should say. The reason is you're sitting there in the box in AA, and it reached that point, much like if Santana would get pissed and say that's not a strike, you're like, well, he's right, it's Santana. When does he not know? That's what it was in AA. You're like, if Yandy's walking away, pissed, something's up because he walked more than he struck out. It was a fluid swing. It was hard to not be impressed with him the more you saw him. I think he could be an everyday answer at third. I mean, you sit there and you talk to people in and around the AA team, and you'd be like, well, what does he need to work on? They're like, well, it'd be nice if he had more power. And the second comment was, well, he doesn't speak any English. Like when they're kind of digging for something, I think that said a lot. I mean, he was the talk of AA. Even when Zimmer was there, when you talk to people around that organization, it would always came back to Yandy. I mean, he'd come up with the big hit, and when you needed him, if there was men on, he was it should be easier to hit with men on base, and it was for him. Every single game you came away impressed. And if you heard a hard hit ball, because that Akron squad, especially when I started going midsummer, was kind of a wasteland of hate being mean, but failed prospects. The Alex Leviskis, the
Carlos Moncrief.
Yeah, Carlos Moncrief. There was a lot of guys like that, and if a ball was hit well, you'd be like, that's probably got to be Yandy, and 1 and 2 times it was. It was just, I put him either 4th or 5th, and I think he should start the year in AAA. I agree. I think Urshula's bat has always been a question. I think he's kind of Jack Hanahan 2.0, and I think Yandy's got a chance there. I mean, I know when I read some pieces by Baseball America and stuff, managers said they thought he has a chance to be a plus defender. I thought it was interesting in the BA chat where they didn't rank Yandy in the top 20 prospects, but then the guy who wrote it goes, every manager I talked to, that was one of the first people they mentioned. It's like, well, then how is he not? If every manager wants to talk about Yandy Diaz, a real small name out of Cuba, zero fanfare. I mean, I hadn't heard of him at all last year. And I mean, he just, when you look at those stats, I mean, I know it's not he wasn't young for the level or anything, but when you look at it, it's only his second year playing outside of Cuba. The environmental changes and everything else, it almost makes you feel like he's a younger player, even though he is like 22, I believe, already. So he's, like I said, I'm super high. I know other people aren't. They see a slap hitter who might not have enough defense to stick at third, who could be a utility down the road. But I think he's got it. I think he'll start. I put him that high because I think he is going to have the opportunity to be more of an on-base third baseman, a guy who can get on base, work some counts.
Yeah, the plate discipline is enough to really make you drool. It's really, really rare that you see guys post at any level a higher walk rate than K rate, especially once you get up around AA. So it's drool worthy. I guess my next question is, well, there are three follow-up questions. The first is, does he add enough power to get to 10? And first, I guess I'm not, the ISOs are terrible. They're not terrible, but they're not great. They're both sub 100. On the other hand, the guy played in Akron this year, which is a wasteland for power. Can he get to 10 to 12 homers? And the other question is, how soon is he ready? Is he ready? Because to me, when I see plate discipline that good at AA, I'm ready to go. He seems like someone. I think the guys who the transition is easiest for are guys who show plate discipline at this level. Is he ready to play in June next year?
I do think power will come because he is a big guy. He's just kind of getting in a and how can I say this without sounding bad? Cuba is a lot of things, but it's third world still. Even for baseball players, this is probably his first time on like a set nutritional and like strong weight regimen. He was not an upper division guy in Cuba. He was not a big name. He wasn't getting those benefits. So this could be, this is, like I said, this is his second year. So there's a chance I think he could just physically get stronger now that can just focus on baseball, and have that weight room and have like strength and conditioning coaches. The ball just flies off of his bat towards the end of the year, and that's when we started to see those doubles and stuff. I mean, at the beginning of the year, everything was a slap hit, but then we started to see, using mostly going out to right field. But occasionally we'd see some shots to left, and that park is horrible for power. Um, I think the ability is there. I don't think he's ever going to be a great power guy. Maybe Ronnie Belliard type power numbers. Kind of that guy who's going to maybe be able to hit like 30, 35 doubles though, but will get 10 to 12 home runs. I think it's there. I just, with the size and the bat and the, just the discipline to wait and hit good pitches. To me, he should be the next bat. Maybe I'm wrong, but he's one of those guys I think could be like, when the time Lindor got called up, that kind of mid-June guy, especially if Urshela comes out of the gate and plays how he did this year. He's a right-handed bat, and I think it's there. He just turned 24, so he's older. So it's time. There's, and he wasn't a big investment, so they can push him. They can do whatever they want with him. I think, like I said, talking to people in Akron this year, just around the organization, it felt like, found money, just having the way he played. No one expected it. But I think he should be the first bat to help the Indians out of the minors. I think even before Naquin, I would expect him, because Naquin's just never been healthy, and he hasn't for 2 straight years. He has not had, it's been partial season. So I would put him up there.
I guess the next question I'm gonna ask you in a way that's I think might change your answer a little bit, but we'll see. So I think one of the large expectations is that the Indians are going to be aggressive in terms of adding something offensively at the big league level this season. I don't necessarily think that's true, but I think there's a very good chance. And so what you see immediately is, what sort of assets do we have to give up? And we're going to cross Aiken off the list, and Sheffield and these types, because while they're interesting to us and the upside's great, they're more valuable to us than I think they are league-wide.
Yes.
Which brings us to Zimmer or Frazier. And this is sort of the conversation we've had for the last year and a half. Which one do you value more? But say LA comes to you with Puig and says, I don't care which one, give me one as a centerpiece, and then we'll build off that. Maybe a Anderson or Clevenger, and then Frazier or Zimmer deal. Which one are you more reticent to give up?
At this point, because of my conservative nature, it's Zimmer, just because I love what Frazier did in the second half, but until that second half, he was looking like a disappointment. We've seen Wes Hodges, as you've mentioned before, have that really awesome second half, and then it never, that was it. We've seen, Kevin Dela Cruz. I could go on probably for 10 minutes naming guys who had these really good halves, and then the second half or the partial half wasn't as strong. If I'm the Indians, while there was a lot of improvements, I'd rather have Zimmer, who came out and performed, who I know he's not right-handed, and I know Frazier has more power, but he's at a higher level. He's more of an all-around player. Better bat, not as much power. So I would, to me, it's not even close. I would move Frazier.
Wow.
I'm conservative. I mean,
I like it.
Good, but I just, one half does not make. I mean, he's still number 2 because of upside and what I like seeing out of high school. But I think if you have to give up one, you clearly give up the guy in the lower level who 6 months ago might not have even been a top 3 prospect based on his first half.
All right. Well, see, Jeff and we never disagree, but now I'm very intrigued. I am someone who's always been I love the advanced college back. I love the polish, and Zimmer was super impressive this year. So no complaints. But I guess my treatise around this scenario rests on the following. They both played an A ball this year, and Frazier's K rate was at 21%, and Zimmer, the polished college bat, was at 23%. And so that's kind of picky and choosy, and I ultimately love both upsides. But I think the injury to Zimmer may have really fogged my glasses for what I expect from him. I think the power was an awesome outcome. The other thing that I think we need to discuss with Zimmer is how real the speed is. We saw him really pop, and I think everybody said he's got we said average to above average at every tool, and I think the narrative always was he's a little bit above average on the bases, maybe just above average. But then we have this guy who dropped 44 steals this year. How much of this is a really smart, polished college player picking on A ball and then a little bit in double A, and how much of it is, man, this guy could steal 30 in the big leagues?
I kind of would lean towards the first one. When I got to see him in Double A, it always stands out when he gets thrown out. I mean, and Double A was a struggle for him this year. There was, it's Double A. It's the biggest transition outside of to the majors, so I didn't get to see him on base as many times. But there was good tools there. I think he could be a 20 stolen base guy. I mean, I think especially with the expectations, he's huge. He's 6'5". That when he was drafted, he was kind of a pull, that he's going to get bigger and thicker, and that might affect his speed. Doesn't always. I mean, that's one of my favorite false stereotypes that people have to get bigger and slower because it doesn't seem to affect running backs in football. But for some reason in baseball, if you get big, your speed's going to go away. I don't think it's above average, possibly plus. It's like a 55-60 grade tool, but with as little as teams run anymore, I feel like to get to 30 bases, you're looking at a real burner, and I don't think I would put that burner tag on him. I could be wrong, but and part of my problem with Zimmer is the time I got to see him in person. I didn't. University of San Francisco just does not get a lot of TV time for whatever reason. But, I didn't see him in A. I only saw him in Double A, and it was not his shining moments for this season.
I think so. So now I'm going to play a little bit of a game here, and I want to hear what your perfect world is. Sort of like a ceiling for Zimmer and a ceiling for Frazier, and then we can talk about their floors and what that means. But what's the Zimmer ceiling? What's a peak perfect world Bradley Zimmer season? Is it 25, 280?
That sounds about right. Yeah, kind of trying to think who I would, and the ability to stick in center while doing it, which, that's what you're talking about there is top 5 center fielder. Maybe trying to think if he had enough power. Maybe peak comp. So the K rate's a little. I don't know if I want to go down. I was gonna say AJ Pollock came to mind. But that might be because they're the same skin tone, which I'm as guilty of as anyone else. But Pollock doesn't strike out as much. But it's someone like that the level. Maybe I'd have to look at the walk rate. But maybe somewhere between a Pollock and an Adam Jones, where Jones's bat has somehow gotten really overrated over the years. A good player, but he's not quite the power threat that he sometimes gets portrayed to be in my mind. But yeah, I think 25, 280, maybe a 340 on base, which with playing above average defense and center, which would make him, to me, a star. But I don't think people realize just how rare what we're talking about is.
Yeah, 25 homers and a 340 OBP with average D and center, maybe even a little under average. That would be 5 WAR, right?
I would think so, yeah.
We're pretty close to talking about a Brantley season with a little more power and a little more stolen bases, or maybe just a Brantley season, except in center, an average defense in center, which is a lot more valuable. I mean, that'd be nuts, right? That's an impact player.
Yeah, no, without a doubt.
So, and then what do we think Zimmer's floor is? To me, he's someone who just has such a safe floor. I would expect is like 15 homers, 15 steals, 265, 270, 325 OBP. Is that a reasonable floor?
I mean, I might drop the home runs to like 10 just because there's always been concern about his power, if it was going to emerge or not. I mean, you know,
Okay.
you'd say maybe a below average center to average corner, 10 home runs. Like you said, about a 320 on base percentage. I still think he would hit, like, just based on his speed and the fact that, he it's not like he's a slap hitter. I think it might only be like 10 home runs, but it closer to like 30, 35 doubles. Maybe to stick to the Brantley thing, maybe similar to Brantley before last season or 2 seasons ago, since I guess this season is kind of done. Maybe the
Mhm.
Brantley that was signed to the extension type of guy.
Okay. And now we can talk Zimmer. So some Frazier here, I guess. Let's talk perfect world. So so that's like 275 and 35 homers and 340 OBP. Is that reasonable?
Yeah, seems about right. Kind of like maybe a Cespedes, but with a better on base percentage.
Oh, that is hot. That is very.
I feel like the athleticism, the speed, the right-handed power, high strikeouts. I feel that that's uh, I think that that's maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like that's a pretty fair comparison. That seems to fit. I mean, there's a chance he could stick in center field as well. He's got a good arm on him. Yeah, I mean, the upside is higher. If we get into that, the upside on a Frazier is higher than the upside on a Zimmer.
I guess my thing with Frazier is I have very high expectations a lot of times, and Frazier essentially to me blew the doors off my expectations this year, and it's why I'm probably higher on him than I should be. But when a guy essentially knocks 30, trims his strikeout rate, knocks it down by about a third, I get really, really excited, especially when he's a 20-year-old in A plus ball. So Frazier to me had probably one of the two or three most exceptional seasons in the Indian system this year, just because he did what he really needed to do, which was he added more power in his second full season and just cut his strikeout rate a huge amount, which really excites me. Uh, but we'll move on here. Is there anything you want to touch on? Any guys that you kind of think are under discussed in the system that you think deserve greater profile?
Um, I would have said Clevenger before his perfect game in AAA, or perfect 7 innings or no hit 7 innings, just because he was the guy. It was such a smart trade. It's funny because you go back to that deadline. It looks like the best piece they got was not for Asdrubal, was not for Masterson. It was for Vinny Pistano, and I read a piece at the time of how he was an interesting guy. He had some really good numbers, and he got hurt, and then he got hurt again. And the nice thing this year was I was able to spend some time in the press box. I was able to go down and talk to the managers and the players. And anyone who talked to Mike Clevenger would tell you that the best thing that happened to his career was getting traded to the Indians. I don't mean this is a slam necessarily on the Angels, but I guess the Angels are very kind of hands off, and the Indians came right in with a plan for him, and he felt like it completely helped basically revitalize his career. That what the Indians stepped up and did, he was just thankful to have been traded to the Indians. That it was amazing, and he gave them just nonstop credit. So I thought he was just an interesting guy, and it was interesting hearing that from a player developmental standpoint. And then I think the other guy who, we talked about how Naquin's overrated because of draft position. The guy who's underrated because of draft position might be Adam Plutko, who was a consensus top 100 player the year he was drafted, but he's a right-hander who doesn't throw super hard. And, he fell to the 11th round, and I remember sitting there talking to people, and they're like, well, that's someone who's going back to their senior year. And I'm like, the Indians saved a lot of money. And then I remember that same person subtweeting me, like, it's always nice when people think they know more about me, more about baseball than I do. And I was like, but the Indians have saved a lot of money. And then, they used it on Pluka that year. he moved through the system quickly. He's going to start the year in AAA. Is he a front of the line starter? Is he going to blow the doors off of guys? No. But is there a chance that he could be a 4 or 5 for the next decade? Yes. And I think there's a very good chance of that. And there's a lot of value in pitching depth. He's a guy who's had success wherever he's gone. His college teammates were Garrett Cole and Trevor Bauer. He's just always been around pitchers. He was considered a first-round prospect coming out of high school. He's got this long track record of success. And he's just, to me, he's one of those guys who rarely gets talked about, but should be a top 10 prospect. And if he was a first-round pick, he would be in the top 10. There's no doubt about it in my mind. If he had been a first-round pick instead of an 11th round pick, he would be in every single top 10. He'd be higher than Nate Quinn in every single top 10. But he went in the 11th round, so we ignore the long history with him because of draft position.
Yeah, I think if there's any tool or skill that has become incredibly underappreciated when we do rankings and discussions about prospects, and even big league pitchers, it's having plus command control.
Mm-hmm.
And Plutko does, and I think it's unfair, but I think there's a lot of similarities between him and a guy like Jeremy Sowers, though I think hopefully Plutko has a better career, but I think we have this guy who has plus command control. He's, I think another similarity would be a guy like Tomlin. And those guys, Tomlin, when he's healthy, is a competent big league pitcher, though we may disagree about this, but those guys have tremendous value, especially if they stay healthy. They stabilize rotations when you have injuries at the top of the rotation. And, Paul Bird had a really, really long career, and so did, Jamie Moyer. And Plutko has better stuff than like late career Jamie Moyer, but plus control command gets you really far, and so I'm excited about Plutko. Do you think if you were going to rank this sort of back end of the bullpen, back end of the rotation, we have Clevenger. People think Merritt. I think that's absurd. We have Anderson. We have Plutko. All these guys are kind of knocking on the door. Do you have it Clevenger, Anderson, Clevenger, Plutko? If you're going to rank upside, would it be Clevenger, Anderson, Plutko, or would it be Plutko second?
If I'm going upside, I do what you say. I think it's Clevenger. I basically agree with everything you just said. I'm just going to repeat you, but upside would be Clevenger, Anderson, Plutko. In terms of next year, Anderson. Okay, so upside Clevenger, then Anderson, then Plutko. In terms of next year, Anderson, Clevenger, Plutko. Yeah, I like Plutko. There is a lot of Tom Rask. He's not going to strike guys out. His walk rate is phenomenal. He does the difference between, I'd have to pull it up, but I don't know what Tomlin looked like in the minors, but it's also encouraging to see Plutko keeps it in the park, which is the biggest weakness for Tomlin. But it's just nice to have, we're not going to have, like last year where the Indians spent $10,000 to trade for the Charles Brewer, who, then bounced between AA and AAA just because they had no depth. They might bring back Gavin Floyd as a pen arm next year, as like a swing arm after, they paid him this year. Sometimes those guys come back on kind of a lesser deal, but they don't have to. In my opinion, the last thing this team needs to do is go out and sign a veteran starter. They got too many arms. You can never have too many. Something's always going to go wrong. No team ever had 5 starters pitch the whole year. I think there was one year the Indians maybe used 6, or someone used 6. There was or 7. There was a really low amount, but that never happens, hardly ever. So it's a nice situation to have. Clevenger and Plutko aren't going to necessarily be guys who are ready in the first month of the year, but hopefully everyone's healthy, everyone throws well, the 5 arms pitch well, and then you can just use Clevenger and Plutko as needed, or if, for whatever situation. But I agree with your rankings, and it's very nice that you'd have to have that concern. And I agree, the Merritts and the Moramondos of the world, you're looking at pen arms. It's not what you want to be getting excited about. It's nice to have depth, and it's nice that I think Merritt specifically has a good chance of being a future pen arm. But that's what we're kind of looking at with more of those guys.
Well, I think that's about all I have, and I want to cut this off before it gets too long. But thanks so much, Jeff, for coming on. I'm sure we'll have Jeff on some more as as the off season progresses, and hopefully as draft coverage comes around.
No, totally. I'd love to.
All right. All right. Thanks so much. This is Mike Hattery for HC signing off.